Good morning, Ariel Tsai. Welcome to the Bookaholic channel.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I am glad you are here. You are only my second poet that I've had on my channel. My first poet is the North Carolina Poet Laureate Jackie Shelton Green, who appeared earlier this year. So, welcome. Glad to have you.
I'm really glad to be here. Thank you very much. It's an honor.
Well, I expressed to Jackie Shelton Green, and I had to be really brave. She's kind of almost a little bit intimidating, but I had to be really brave and tell her that I had always said to myself, I never really liked poetry. It was difficult for me to understand. I didn't study it really in school in depth. And so it just was just always just so hard for me to understand. And I couldn't figure out, what is this about? Just couldn't interpret it. And then I gave it some deeper thought and realized, okay, well, there are some poetry that I do enjoy, some Maya Angelou, et cetera, et cetera. And because of how I've been thinking and feeling, I did challenge myself. I picked up some bell hooks poetry, which I have not read yet. I picked up Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar. I did pick this book up, and I still haven't read it, but it's called There Are More Beautiful Things Than Beyonce by Morgan Parker. And so, I'm challenging myself to read a lot more poetry. I did pick up the 2020 I think it was 2021 best poetry book, and it had all the best poets for that year. And I have been reading some of that. So I kind of want to go in depth a little bit about poetry and certainly about your poems. So first, let's give the audience a backstory of your education. Your education certainly has uh, made sure that you have the ability to do these things, but I don't think you need a degree to write poetry. But tell us a little bit about your educational background.
So, I went to Hunter College. I double majored there in English, literature, and criticism with a focus in linguistics and Chinese language and literature. I spent a year abroad in China studying the Chinese language and literature.
Mhm.
Um, only 3 years of my time were at Hunter were spent actually in New York studying.
Right.
Um, and you're right, you don't need a degree to write literature, but I happen to have a degree in literary criticism, and that means that I've read a lot and I've analyzed a lot of literature, and I find that that brings itself into my writing process as well because um, I'm looking at it not only through the lens of a writer, but also through the lens of a critic. Um,
Yeah.
and I liked what you said about poetry being difficult because I find that that's a very common opinion, um,
Mhm.
especially from people whose real exposure to poetry is like in high school or something like that.
Exactly.
And maybe you read Shakespeare or Robert Frost or something like that, and it's like um, there's nothing wrong with those poets. They're great poets, but sometimes they're not as digestible for the modern audience,
Right.
especially for high schoolers.
Right.
Um, and so, one of the things that I aspire to when I write is to make it accessible. Um, and I've taken a lot of inspiration from modern poets like Ada Limon,
Mhm.
who I highly recommend that you read.
Okay.
In having this sort of like balance between having a readable poetry for a modern audience and also like bringing in symbolism from that I covered in my education, like Christian symbolism, classical symbolism, post-colonial symbolism, um, feminist criticism, that sort of thing. Like, I look at my poetry through the lens of a critic and therefore write with that same lens in mind. Um,
Right.
yeah.
Wow. And just to take a few steps back for that portion, the criticism portion to even be offered in education, I think that's fascinating. I had never heard of that as being part of a major at university. And did I cut it off? It was, name it again. The part with the criticism part was called what?
Literature and criticism.
Literature and criticism. And maybe it's just because I did not go down that path, but I had never heard of that. And I think that's very fascinating in the way that you explained it. Possibly we need more classes, if it's not an entire major, maybe a class like that. And I think that would help more people understand not only poetry, but just literature in general, especially
Yes.
the ones that they want us to really understand. From that European aspect that you were always focused on. I was in school in a whole different time frame than when you were, but the ones that they emphasized when I was going through school was the entire, the European
Hmm.
perspective of literature. It was never from anybody else's perspective, and
Shame.
I think it makes it seem like that you don't understand. Some people maybe feel like they're not as smart, but it's not your alley. It's not your, I don't know, something that you can connect with.
Hmm.
So I think that the more we get more diverse people in writing literature and poetry, that's probably going to help the digestible processing of of understanding, what is being written.
Definitely. And I think that more diverse perspectives, not only do they provide you with, more material from which you can, look at it through a literary criticism lens, but also
Mhm.
they provide you with more looks into lives which are different from the quote unquote norm of like Euro American literature,
Right.
like particularly white Euro American
Mhm.
literature.
Correct.
Um, the more diverse perspectives we have, the more students can engage with lenses and perspectives which are different from their own. And I feel
Yes.
like that breeds empathy, which is
Yes.
one of the reasons why I wrote my book in the first place, is because I am a Taiwanese American, first gen in America kid, and like I, have dealt with mental illness. I have dealt with grief, with loss, with abuse, with trauma, and I felt that my story and my perspective was one which um, could be told in the form of poetry. So that's why I did what I did. I
Yes.
chose to, um, tell my story because I believe that more stories like mine and more stories unlike mine should be told because it helps breed empathy for people like me.
Yes, yes. And so you made a statement and you said, I'm the author of Narcissus, a poetry collection exploring the concepts of self and self love, among other topics. And so before we go into the actual book, people forget school is many years behind a whole lot of people. Let's talk about Narcissus, I hope I'm saying his name right,
Yeah.
who was in mythology.
Yeah.
And so describe Narcissus and his mythological story to the audience, please.
Sure. So Narcissus was a youth in ancient Greek mythology. He's described in Ovid's Metamorphoses. Ovid was a Latin poet
Mhm.
who, has this book called Metamorphoses, all about a lot of Greek and Roman myths, um, which are pretty much very similar. But anyway, in Metamorphoses, Narcissus is a youth who is so beautiful that he scorns the love of many men and women, and one of his scorned lovers calls upon the goddess of revenge to strike down Narcissus, and make him feel the pain that he has made others feel. So the goddess of revenge, Nemesis, she
Yes.
answers, and um she makes Narcissus find this very still pool in the middle of the
Yeah.
woods where he sees his own reflection and falls in love. And at
Yeah.
first, he doesn't realize it's his own reflection, but he can't figure out why he can't touch this person, why this person seems to be talking to him as well and seems to be just as enamored with him, but he can't touch them, he can't feel
Ah,
them. And then he realizes it's himself that he's in love with, and he
yeah.
despairs. And there are different versions of the myth, but in um, Ovid's version of the myth, um, he lays there by the side of the pool and wastes away in his longing and grief for his love for himself,
Yeah.
and then eventually dies and becomes a narcissus flower, which is the flower
Yes.
that's on the cover of my book.
Yes.
They're
Exactly.
daffodils,
Yes. Yeah.
also known as poet's lilies sometimes.
Oh,
And
okay.
their
Okay.
Latin name is Narcissus because of the myth.
Yes, 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 yes. So I remember that story. I almost thought that he fell in love with so much with himself that he fell into the pool. I thought maybe, but again,
That is
like I
one
said,
version of the myth. One
years.
version of the myth is that he falls into the pool.
Oh, it does.
The myth is that he drowns himself out of his grief. Yeah,
That's the one we were taught in school that he drowns,
yes.
and so during the pandemic, I'm going back to go forward. During the pandemic, we all realized so much about ourselves and about the world and everyone. And I'm not going to say it was just a buzzword. I think people really took it seriously and to delve into self care. And people were very much focused on that. And I liked that concept that people were really looking at mental health and
Mhm.
mental health issues and all of these things. Then, as we go along, as a matter of fact, I was just talking to someone yesterday who was providing a service for me. We were talking about narcissists, and we were talking about that also because I had an interview with another author who had wrote about a narcissist, and that was part of their real life story. And people are becoming more familiar and touching base inside with what's going on and why they may be having problems. They have been gaslighted. They have gaslit themselves. We are all experiencing so many different things, and I'm so appreciative that more and more people are learning about taking care of themselves, learning more about mental health issues. And I think your book of poetry is going to bring about that as well. Once you know about Narcissus, the young Greek boy in mythology, and you tie that with the real world definition of a narcissist, you begin to really understand what that is and how that can really affect you, and that you just may be surrounded by or in a relationship with or work with narcissists, and it will help you deal with who they are and who you are at the same time. So why did you want to name your book after that Greek mythological boy?
So, um, it's more of a play on the myth itself. It's not that I think that self love is narcissism. Although
Okay.
there was a point in my life where I did think that, and that self love was just selfishness. But
Mm,
I've come to realize that it's a matter of degrees, right?
mhm.
There's a certain degree of self love where if you don't love yourself, that's extremely unhealthy. But if you
Right.
love yourself too much, like you are a narcissist, then
Vanity.
that's also unhealthy.
Mhm.
For both are unhealthy for yourself and for all of the people around you.
Right.
But there's a happy medium wherein you love yourself enough to set your boundaries about yourself, where you love yourself enough to have a healthy relationship with yourself and with the other people in your life. That's the kind of self love that I aspire to. And the reason I call this book Narcissus is because it's about the complicated nature of self-love, about how there are these extremes that you can go to, and I have been at one extreme in my lifetime, and I have experienced the other extreme in my lifetime as well, just in the form of the people that I've met and stuff like that. But
Right.
um, it's that search for that happy medium that is
Right.
so complicated, and it's that search that is the core of the storyline of the poetry collection. So some
Mhm.
poetry collections, they don't really have a storyline because they're unconnected poems.
Right.
And mine does, because I wanted there to be a storyline. I wanted there to be this sort of grander story arc that people could see as they read through the book. Um, Again, that's the literary critic side of me coming into play. But
Mhm.
you know, the story arc is one of a building's roman, or like the development arc of coming into oneself, of coming of age. That is the sort of maturity. That's the sort of story arc that I wanted to try to tell, this journey towards self-love,
Yes.
towards a happy medium.
Yes. 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 Well, you speak of trauma, you speak of loss, you are a member of the LGBTQ community, you speak of mental health issues. If you could please, and I'm putting you on the spot, to read us a poem that is addressing some or one of these issues in your book.
Hmm, let's see.
And I like the fact that you said that particular collection of yours is a story arc. I think that would also help a lot of people to dive into poetry when there's a story arc, a progression, as opposed to just kind of like disjointed poems and they really don't have a connection. So I think that would help a lot of people to enjoy poetry a little bit more.
Okay. I have a poem from towards the end of my book, so from towards the end of my story arc.
Okay.
It's called April, and it's about my seasonal depression.
Oh,
Um, so, while on a walk the other day, I saw tulips blooming in a planter box, and I almost cried right then and there on the crowded sidewalk. I never used to be this emotional, but nowadays anything gets me going. Shattered glass on the pavement, catching the light as it drains out of the sky at sunset, videos of dogs waiting for someone to come home, numbers on a scale measuring how much space I take up, dollars in my wallet phasing in and out of existence, the sight of new green buds sprouting from the dead-looking trees. You see, every winter my love for this city withers and dies along with the broadleaf trees. I forget why I love it here or why I bother staying. When it rains when they said it would snow and the sleet mixes with the salt on the pavement, the slush that forms on the sidewalk seeps into my shoes and under my skin. I forget because it's easier than torturing myself with the memory of the New York sun that comes and goes all summer in a day. Easier than going mad with grief at the sight of that cold, dying star trapped behind the gridlock clouds, struggling to light up this freezing concrete wasteland. In the winter, I lie dormant under the frozen earth, curled in fetal position among the tangled roots of bare trees, forgetting the sun and the warmth and how to be alive. But April comes like a long lost lover and exhumes me. She sweeps me up in her tumultuous moods and holds me close. And the gardeners in this gentrified neighborhood, they wake the waiting dormant bulbs thawing in the softening earth, and me along with them, and I remember. I remember the smell of spring rain. I remember greens and pinks and yellows that the winter gray had bleached from my memory. I remember that no matter how long and bitter the winter is, the flowers and trees all still know how to bloom again when the spring comes. Maybe I have forgotten how to do the same, or maybe not. Maybe the seed and the root are still there, somewhere, waiting for the sun.
Oh, Ariel, that is beautiful. I mean, that I understood where you were coming from. I mean, and the words that you put together were just so almost magical the way that you put that. I mean, and so you're entering not your season, you
No.
know. Your season is coming upon you that you do not like, that you do not care for, that causes you depression. So,
Mhm.
just a side question: how are you going to combat that? Facing it head on.
I mean, I have been in therapy for about 6 years now, and so, like, things don't get as bad as they used to be. Um,
Hmm.
like, when I wrote that poem, I was in probably sophomore year of college,
Mm,
and, it's been a couple of years since then, and I've grown since then, and I've learned
mhm,
since then how to better
mhm.
deal with my seasonal depression on top of my normal depression.
Right.
Um, and, um It's hard, but I have strategies, I have tools, I have, like, this little happy light that sits on my desk. Um,
Yes.
I have, self-care, tools sort of implemented into my life. I have people in my life that I can turn to when I feel sad.
Hmm.
I have my therapist, of course. So, even if things get bad, they never get as bad as they used to. And that's that sort of
Yeah.
perspective that I try to keep in mind. Like,
Yes.
especially with the beginning of my book, the beginning of my book is at the beginning of the story arc. So it's the exposition, it's the layout of, where we are currently. And it's the sort of the lowest point of the book because the
Hmm.
story arc rises, right? So it's the
Right.
lowest point of the book, and poems there really exemplified like how bad things were for me and why.
Right.
Um, Especially during like some of the more tumultuous years of my life. Like the oldest poems in this book are about 7 years old, but
Hmm.
I took the span of about a year during the pandemic, actually, to
Okay.
put together this book, to write new material for the book, to you know manuscript everything out and edit everything and like lay everything out, and it was kind of like insane, but I would do it again. Like
Yeah.
I'm writing material for a second book now.
Okay. Okay. That sounds fantastic. Now, who is your publisher? Is this self-published or?
So I went through an assisted self-publishing program called
Oh.
the Creator Institute. It's founded by this professor at Georgetown University called named Professor Eric Custer,
Okay.
and he just wanted to make the publishing of books more accessible to more people because more people deserve to have their stories told. Um,
Yes.
and so it's a program that provides, like, for a small fee, provides you with editorial support and like publishing support and marketing support, um, and it sort of holds your hand through the process of
Mhm.
self-publishing. So it's self-published in a way, but it's also like not. You have a lot of help along the way.
Wow.
And my publisher is New Degree Press, which is an indie publisher that is associated with this program.
Oh, okay. This is out of all the interviews that I've done of people who have been on a self-published or a semi-self-publishing journey, that's the first I've ever heard of the Creator Institute. So that's very intriguing. Maybe I can get an interview with someone from there sometime in 2023 because I think a lot more people need to know about that. It's
Yeah.
hard to then you write the project, whatever that project may be, and then you've got to all of a sudden become a marketer, and then you got
Yes.
to know about binding and all of these things. And so so definitely that sounds very helpful
Oh
to
yeah.
people who are writing books and are not backed by one of the big five. Now, um let's talk a little bit about a poet that you mentioned that we should take a read of. Did you say Ada Limon?
Ada Limon. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Tell us a little bit about this poet.
So she's a modern poet. She's still writing. She has 4 or 5 collections out, I think.
Okay.
Um, and I don't know as much about her as I should. I've only read one of her books thus far and some
Right.
like individual poems.
Right.
Um, but her style is like sort of eclectic, but very readable, very vivid imagery. That's something that I think poetry does very well, is like
Mhm.
having very vivid images that convey some kind of emotion or thought or philosophy.
Yes.
And I think that's something that she particularly excels at.
Okay.
Um, just uh, with the image of a tree or something like that, like conveying her grief for her past, or
Mhm.
um, with the image of a farm, like conveying something else. Like it's just, um, I don't know. It is something that's sort of magical to me, that
Right.
someone can look at the ordinary world and see beauty in it and see meaning in it.
Yes, yes, yes. That kind of reminds me, and it's another conversation that I've been involved with over the past couple of weeks. And remember when multitasking was so highly rated? Oh, I can multitask and multitask and multitask. And we found out, referencing back to the pandemic, we found out that multitasking was just not providing us with the best work. It
Hmm.
was causing us a lot of stress, and that really you just need to focus on one thing at a time.
Yes.
If possible, you need to focus on at least projects, one thing at a time. And that's kind of like you're saying, she brings out the beauty in simple things. And I find that when you focus on, ordinary life can be beautiful. And to go back and reference that you're headed towards not your favorite time of the year,
Hmm.
there are beautiful things that happen
Yes.
when in New York in that dark period. The just simple things like the ice skating that all of a sudden pops out in
Yeah.
New York, that a person like me, I love to go visit New York at Christmas time and see that.
Mhm.
So yeah, focusing on the small things, the what seems to be mundane. There is beauty in the mundane.
Yeah.
There's peace in the mundane.
I last winter went for a walk in the woods after a snowstorm, and all of the trees and everything were covered in ice,
Yeah.
and like there were flowers somehow still growing, but they were also covered in ice, like encased in ice, as if they
Yeah.
were being preserved for something. And I did
Yes.
a lot of writing that day. It was a productive day.
Yes, 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 yes. So I pray that, I know that, you go see your therapist. I'm sure there's medication involved, but I pray that you will be able to face with the winter coming, with a lot more hope than in years past. So I'm glad for that, that you've made that progress, as a matter of fact. Now, you mentioned some other poets that it kind of made me chuckle in your description. And you said something, let me make sure I'm reading it right. You said, um, you feel a great deal of shame about your Anglophilic preferences in literature. John Milton and Philip Pullman are likely to blame. And so I looked up John Milton, and I had forgotten all about Paradise Lost. And that's something that we did not study, but I know of.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what attracts you to this poet born in 1608? And I'm sure it's Paradise Lost. So, what attracted you to him and his writing?
So, really, it's Philip Pullman that's to blame. Philip Pullman is the author
Okay,
of the His Dark Materials series,
I saw
which
that.
includes The Golden Compass, The Subtle Knife, and The Amber Spyglass.
Okay.
Um, and that trilogy is in direct conversation with Paradise Lost. So I read the trilogy when I was maybe 9 years old, and to this day, it stands up as one of my favorite books, or book trilogies, I should say. Um,
Wow.
and um, I read Paradise Lost first when I was in high school, but then studied it more in depth in college,
Mm-hmm.
um, in multiple different classes actually. So I got different lenses on the symbolism, on the meaning of things, and I've always loved how densely elusive, like in the sense of allegory,
Mm-hmm.
that Milton's work is, and I've loved how he brings in Christian symbolism, but also um, classical symbolism, and then also like symbolism of things from his own time,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's all within. In Paradise Lost, it's blank verse, so it's like each line is 10 syllables each, and there's no real rhyme scheme, and
Right.
um, it's the first like epic poem in English, the English language.
Okay.
Um, so, and it's about the biblical story of the fall from grace, of like
Yes.
the Garden of Eden, and Adam and Eve eating from the tree of knowledge and then being kicked out from the Garden of Eden,
Right.
um, which is very, very short in Genesis in the Bible, but he makes it this 12-part epic, um, and it's so fascinating.
Wow.
Um, One of the other things that I love about Milton is that to this day, I mean, it was written in the 17th century, but to this
Yeah.
day, people argue who the hero of the poem is. Some people say it's Eve, some people say it's Adam, some people say it's Satan himself,
Oh God.
um, which is all, they're all valid critical readings of the
Right.
poem.
Right.
Um, for a poem that was written so long ago to be so dense and to be so elusive for us even now, for us to be, um, you know, contemplating its meaning even now, centuries later, like that is
Mm-hmm.
something that, if I were, if I had a head full of dreams, like of being some kind of legendary writer, like that's
Yes.
something that I would aspire to. But um, no, for me, like I just want to write poems that I like and then
Mm-hmm.
hope that they touch some people.
Yes, yes. And I think they do. Just by you reading that one poem, I think there's a lot of people that can relate to that.
Yeah.
Even if it's not a like you said, the seasonal depression on top of real depression, there's got to be millions of people out there that suffer from both of those, and so I do believe, that definitely will touch a lot of people. It touched me just here, and you just read it off the cuff. So definitely, I think you're on the right path. And to go back really quickly, Philip Pullman, you compare that, you said his is directly opposite than
No,
Paradise Lost, or it's a
it's in
analogy of?
conversation with Paradise Lost. So Paradise Lost, the ending of it is Adam and Eve being kicked out from the Garden of Eden, but
Of
Adam
course.
is shown sort of a prophecy of what is to come in the Bible. So he gets this like fast forwarded version of the Bible where he sees like, you know, mankind and its rise, and then um, eventually the Judgment Day, and like,
Hmm.
I mean, he sees Christ and he sees Christ's death, and then he sees like Judgment Day and stuff like that. So
Right.
it gives him hope, even though they're being punished.
Right.
Um, that someday there will be a kingdom of heaven on earth again.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Philip
Yes.
Pullman's Paradise Lost. I mean, sorry, in Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials trilogy, um, there's a quote that says like, "We build the Republic of Heaven where we are because for us there is nowhere else," meaning that heaven should not be a kingdom under God, but instead a republic where the voices of the individuals are heard, and it's built by all of us coming together where we are, not waiting for salvation from the beyond, but instead building a republic together, um,
Yes.
of heaven, on
Yes.
earth.
Yes, 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 yes. And I can see someone writing that and hearing about that. Yes, at least the trying of that.
Yeah.
At least. And so now tell us, I think you briefly mentioned that you're working on another book.
Yes.
Okay, tell us a little bit about that project, what you can.
So, I have a couple of poems right now, and I was playing around with titles and themes and stuff like that, but I still haven't decided on a central theme for the book just as of yet.
Hmm.
Um, or a title really. I need more material for that. Um, and recently I've been facing a good deal of writer's block. But
Okay.
I had a conversation with an artistic friend of mine recently. We were talking about creative block and like ways to get through it.
Hmm.
So I think that conversation helped a lot. And, I wrote a bit that day for the first time in weeks. And I don't know, it made me kind of emotional because I was like,
Hmm.
some days, some days I give up on the concept of a second book because I'm like, I've already done my sort of magnum opus. Like, what am I going to follow it up with next?
Right.
Um, and some days, like, I just feel so shitty about my writing, like,
Right.
that I feel like it's not worth hearing, it's not worth reading. But then there are other days where I'm better to myself and better to my writing, and then I read it and it's like, this isn't so bad and I can make this better. The
Right.
editorial process of writing is actually my favorite part of the process.
Right.
Not so much the creation, although the creation is important, it's maybe like 10% of the process. Like, most
Right.
of writing is revision, revision,
Right.
revision. And I love that part, which makes me a weirdo, but I love that part.
Was gonna say. Well, I think that even though you feel that way about your first book, you have a lot more life to live
Yep.
and you have a lot more life to give. And you will, once you acknowledge that, and like I said, there's so much beauty in the mundane.
Hmm.
I think you have plenty to write about, and
Oh,
I think you can do it. Definitely. You're a brilliant writer. I can tell you're a brilliant person. And I thank the universe, I thank God for people like you who can sit down and write their truth. Even though they may be facing mental obstacles, you've done something very brave and written down your truth.
I only hope that that truth can help others find their own truth.
Yes, yes. And I do believe it will. And speaking of that, so that we can get more of your information out there, your book out there, your social media, any other contacts, and links to your book will be in the podcast show notes, as well as in the video description box on my YouTube channel. So, Ariel, I have enjoyed this conversation. I really appreciate you. And I know this is not the last we'll hear from you.
Thank you very, very much for having me.
You're very much appreciated. Thank you.